Okay,
I think we're on. So
we're
we
on.
are.
We're ready to roll on a Sunday afternoon.
Sat by the fireside.
Yes.
It's our usual position
Yes.
on a Sunday, Alfie.
Where's the fire? Freddie, last week I sent you a clip of Chris Marker, filmmaker, French, poet, filmmaker, artist. It's a clip of a film that he calls a book called La Jetee.
Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, it was only a couple of minutes long, wasn't it? As far as I remember, anyway. Anyway, the film or book, La Jetee, is literally 29 minutes long. So where do I begin with this? I'll tell you what, as I told you already, it had a massive, great impact upon me. I'm looking if my voice is going. Is that okay?
You'll be alright. Just try letting go of it and just letting it hang and see what happens.
No, I think it's...
We can relax then.
It's okay. Anyway, where to begin with this, what I call masterpiece, which really did have a massive, great... well, it still does have this huge impact on me as an individual, and a hell of a lot of other people who've seen it. I think it was made in 1961. What's gone wrong?
Something like that. It's alright, don't worry. We'll keep
1961. France. And I see it in about 1969. London. Right, where do we begin with this? It's a film or a book about an image. That's the first thing. I have to keep this in mind. It's an image, and it's an image of a woman's face. And it's a story of a young boy out for a day with his family at Orly Airport. Paris? Orly Airport?
Right.
You should know that.
My Parisian geography is not massive.
Okay. Anyway, and this woman's face is the centre point of...
She's very beautiful, as I remember from watching the clip.
What actually begins to unfold. The boy observes the woman, and he observes a man being shot. Right? And he appears to be running towards the woman. But then the film jumps into the future, and Paris has been devastated by a nuclear war. I don't think you got that in the clip.
I didn't get the first, but it was it was mighty confusing and quite stark.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about when it was made, 1961, I think it was, the Cuban crisis.
Okay, yeah.
Also, it was only 15, 16 years previously that Paris was liberated from the Nazis. So that was still pretty prominent in French cultural life. This idea that they had been conquered by the Nazis. Anyway, we can come back to that. I mean, keep on jumping about, as you know. The actual story,
like the piece itself.
Yes, the actual story concerns a man. This is in the future, after the devastation of Paris, after the nuclear war, of a man who's been selected out of thousands and thousands of other people. And the reason he's been selected is because of the image of the woman. Right. Now, the reason also he's been selected is because he needs to travel back in time to make a connection. Time travel to bring food into this future. Now, thousands of people, men, have died in this experiment,
Right.
and it's the woman's face.
So how do they know about the image of the woman's face in him?
It's the scientific method that they're using.
So they can see what's in his.
Yeah, he's all wired up.
Right.
And it's also, when you look at the photographs of what's happening to him with these iPads and wires, it's very like some of the Nazi experiments on Russian prisoners. Being experimented on.
So that's made 15 years after the war. So it's quite fresh.
So also it's a pretty horrendous. He is a prisoner trapped underground, being experimented on and being tortured. But he's got this image of this woman.
Right.
That's enough for him to get sent back into time.
Okay.
Right. Now, this is where, for me, this is where it gets really interesting, because it's all about memory, loss, love, truth, time.
Okay.
He goes back, and there's the woman.
Yeah.
That he's seen on the pier.
On the pier, yeah.
Yeah. And she's not surprised to see him.
Right.
There's no, wow. It's like he hasn't been away.
Okay.
I must get this right because it's getting me confused. Holy shit, man. Anyway, and a relationship is established, and he keeps on being dragged back into his present.
Right.
But the thing to remember is the woman was sort of expecting him.
Right.
So something may have been going on. We don't know. That's just one of the many sort of strange clues. And he keeps on getting sent back and meets the woman in various places around Paris where they walk along, they sort of museums, and they start setting up a relationship. She's not bothered about this, and he's quite comfortable with it as well. It's almost like they've been expecting to meet up.
Right.
But all the time you see her face. It's quite prominent. And the experiments get more and more, not grotesque, more and more powerful.
Yeah, they're quite dark. There's
it
a few
is,
scenes that in the beginning you showed me. They're really stark, like his mask on him.
It's almost like he's imprisoned.
Electrodes and all sorts of stuff, yeah.
So there is an imprisonment. And it's all in stills. That's why he called it, Chris Marker, a book. But there's one point in the film, book, where they're together in bed. And just for a brief second, she opens her eye. Now, whatever that means, I haven't got a clue. But when I first see it with an audience, it was like, wow.
Okay.
Wow. But all the time, it's this woman that he's going back to. And he meets.
So is that the only moving image?
That's the only moving. It's for a brief second, quite literally.
Right.
She just opens her eye, and that's it. And her face is still the same, basically, as when you first saw her on the pier, when you meet her. So it's almost like she's not changing at all in the past. There's nothing about the war that's going to come their way. The nuclear explosions, nothing about that. It's a relationship. And he goes back and they meet, they go back into museums, they meet in strange places. But then he's contacted, the prisoner, by the future. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the future that we see in the film is just a load of grids. It's almost like it's a new city.
Right.
Again, stark black and white. And there's a few faces. And they say that they can help him escape from his predicament by coming back or by going forward in time, like a time travel.
Yeah.
And because I haven't seen this for a while, this is where it's getting a bit weird for me actually. He refuses because he knows he's got to go back and he's got to see the woman again. He's got to, because they can escape.
Right.
They can escape from their predicament, or he can. She's oblivious to this, what's happening,
and him just being jumping to her at different points, and is he trying to get back to a sort of linear existence?
So what happens? You know, book fashion, you're turning over the pages. What happens is we're back at the airport,
right,
where he was as a child, and he's running towards the woman who's at the pier, and there's a guy waiting there who shoots him in the back. Right. And that's the image that we see at the start of the film.
Okay, so what, he's watching himself get shot?
Yeah, as a child. Does it make sense?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's quite mind-bending. So he basically gets trapped in a so it's what's the... So I suppose in 61, I mean, how much time travel art had there been at that time? Is this an early kind of...
Well, I think it's always been fascinating, H.G. Wells.
Yeah. We read that by this fire a couple of years ago.
And I think in terms of science fiction, it's always been about at that period. I don't know if the Nazis were into this at all, but certainly in terms of, you could say, playfulness in sci-fi, and the dangers of it, of course, of playing about with time and memory. So, as I say, is it it isn't a science fiction movie.
Well, no, there's obviously this side, but it's very much the bit you showed me. It's quite obviously it's an artist's expression of it's art in that sort of sense of personal creation, and it's not technical in that kind of science fiction. It's just beautiful,
No, it's as you said, it's pretty bleak.
There's a lot more to it than just sci-fi.
Those scenes underground. I mean, they are concentration camp, and it's absolutely, the poem, the narration is absolutely very beautiful. But there's also a strong emphasis on the music as well, which is stands out on its own. It doesn't interfere with the duration, which is quite. It adds something to a story that is already, you could say, it's already known in time. If that's making it.
It sort of makes sense. Go on, elaborate.
Yeah, well, the music is there because it doesn't set the scene. In a lot of films you have, a man walking up the stairs, there's music, or a woman coming down, there's music. There's background noise, basically. The music doesn't do that in this film, but it's necessary it's almost like sitting back, closing your eyes, and being taken somewhere. It's not psychedelic or anything, it's just a beautiful piece of music. But Chris Marker himself maintains that it's not all that original, the movie.
Right.
Because he based it upon Hitchcock, Vertigo.
Right.
And these sorts of, the image, because it's a film about the image. The image never leaves, and the image is the woman. That is the centre point. and I mean, she's absolutely beautiful to look at. So it's this captured moment, almost frozen in time. You know, and there's no reference to when he goes back and meets her. There's no reference to life going on in Paris. They meet, they walk around, and he disappears. It's almost like she accepts that as part of a relationship.
Right.
Because she doesn't know where he comes from. She doesn't know that he's been sent from the future. She just recognises him as somebody she knew from her life.
Right.
So it's those questions. I can see you going, oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. So the more you think about it, the more it's, you rediscover this whole thing about, the whole meaning of time. And history.
Okay.
Our history is blocked out. The nuclear holocaust, and the guy underground, basically, the living. He's a prisoner who's kept alive simply because of the image.
Right.
Apart from that, he's worthless.
Crikey.
He doesn't really mean much, actually. It's just this image. Because as the narration says that thousands and thousands of men had already been experimented on and killed.
And it's to make sure I've got this right, it's the power of the image that allows him to travel through time.
Or the power of love.
Well, one could surmise that, I suppose, if that's the powerful image needed. Yeah.
And there's also lots of other sort of ideas you can play around with. Who was it who went into the underworld? Orpheus in the underworld.
Yeah, well, loads of them, but yes.
Yeah, he went into the underworld to release, free. Forget her name now. Why have I forgotten her name?
What is her name?
It's not Ophelia.
Oh, that's terrible. We're rubbish at this, aren't we? What is her name? Orpheus and... Persephone? No. It's not Persephone, is it? But it might be a P. Penelope? No.
Penelope?
Oh, I wrote a little...
Anyway, you know what?
For a treatment for a show about that, and I can't remember her name.
And there's the whole thing.
She's in her gilded cage down there, prisoner of Hades, isn't she?
Yeah,
and
that's
then
it.
he has to.
And they can't look back, can they?
On his way out.
Yeah.
Yes, but he can't help himself.
Yeah, which is very similar to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay, I don't know that one.
It's in the Old Testament.
Oh yes.
Don't look back. And when Sodom and Gomorrah are being destroyed, Lot, is it Lot?
Oh, it might be. My Bible's terrible.
Yeah. Welcome, folks, to a Sunday afternoon in the tea house. Forgetfulness is all part of the
blundering around.
It's Lot's wife looks back. He says, "Do not look back." And when she looks back, she turns to a pillar of salt.
Right.
Is there anybody here in the audience, in the crowd?
Well, you see, yes, I've definitely heard of Lot's wife.
Yeah. So there's, the more you think about it, this whole reference of image, transgression, almost, sort of.
I suppose there's if you're going to go there, you can go to Medusa as well.
Yeah. The look, the gaze,
yeah.
Well, that comes onto a different level, doesn't it? I think we'll do that next week.
Okay.
The reason is that will be absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing a lot of work on her anyway. But
cool. But yeah, just this idea, like you say, this idea of image. It's
very pronounced, and it's like a lot of these movies. They are, or discourse or whatever. And on YouTube, they've got one of his last movies, which is The Last Bolshevik.
Right.
I think I told you this.
Yes, you did.
The Russian artist, manipulator, who sailed through the the Russian Revolution.
Right.
And it's a very angry. This guy, Melevich, he actually was a real person.
Right.
And he had a sort of a correspondence going on for years between himself and Chris Marker. It's all about questioning. But the great thing about, Marker was an amazing talent, because in this film, it's also incredibly funny. There is, have I told you this, the scene in 1930, Red Square.
Okay.
This is an actual piece of Russian propaganda.
All right.
There's a group of farmers in Red Square with a tractor. The Russians love tractors. And they're trying to fix this tractor.
Yeah.
But they can't. And suddenly this character appears, very stern, smoking a pipe, big moustache, a big overcoat and cap. And they look up, and it's Comrade Stalin,
Yes.
who happens to fix the tractor
Fixes the tractor. Of course he does. Yeah, absolutely.
in Red Square. And which gets onto this whole idea of image. Again.
Yeah. So that particular thing, that's a piece of Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
Associated with the movie, the last,
associated with
Bolshevik,
the
or just influencing.
associated with the history of the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, they love tractors,
Yeah.
and a person or a firm that was really dominant in Russian Bolshevik industrial ideology was an American.
All right.
It was Ford. Ford Motors.
Right.
I'm not joking,
No.
actually. Reason being, it was the. It's actually called Fordism. It's how you make a motor car on the production line.
Well, yeah, because he was that. Yeah, that was his great breakthrough, was the production line, wasn't it?
And the workers on those production lines, they could not step out of line. If you let a screw something in, you had to do that. And this fits in nicely with the Bolshevik ideology of how society could be
Automated or
automated, yeah. But they're all the time they're working for the revolution. Ford was working for himself and for capitalism. I mean, to work for Ford, you were trapped. I mean, there was no unions or anything like that. That was all banned. But you did have certain, what do you call it? You had certain little bits of in your pay packet a bit more. You know, there was the housing. There was ways of behaviour, and there was time and motion was invented by Fordism, which again was transferred over to the Bolsheviks. You could measure the new man by time and motion. So you go into the factory, you clock in, you go to your position of work, and you start working. Bell goes, tea break. Bell goes back to where you were.
Yeah.
But that was, they were doing that in America before they were doing it in Russia.
It's sort of similar. It's just whether you're working for the revolution of the state or you're working for the company and yourself to a certain extent, because you gain the fruit of your labour as opposed to working for the revolution.
But also with Fordism, there was the what can you say? around the factories, towns grew up for workers working at Ford's.
Yeah.
And I'll have to get this right, actually. You would buy all your goods and all your food from Ford around the. So it was
sort of small monopoly.
Yeah,
on the,
it was a
on the
very,
area.
it was a very sort of. I mean, you could vote. I expect you could say in American elections, but also in 1935, Ford got very friendly with Hitler.
Right.
And introduced not the German motor car, he introduced lorries into Germany,
Right.
which were used in the Second World War. It was Ford production line, and it was only in 1941 that Ford stopped
Just before the.
supporting Nazi Germany.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that in America, isn't there? Like the 20s progressives, like your Woodrow Wilson's New Deal ideas, a lot of those themes
Roosevelt,
and ideas were exported to Europe and used by, the more authoritarian state regimes in Europe, and the Nazis and the fascists, a lot of those progressive ideas from America kind of transferred across, and some of them were used in a sort of similar way.
But also, the ambiguity of all that, it was Ford's techniques that helped supply Britain in the land deal at the start of the Second World War.
Right.
We'll give you all this. You don't have to pay yet, but you will pay later. And it was quite we couldn't have actually achieved the Ford output.
Well, no.
So all that was coming across from America. That was even before America. That was a way that Roosevelt could bypass the American Senate to say because we're not actually we're not actually fighting the war, but we're
just selling
certainly
to the British.
Yeah, all this stuff is going over.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, but it's sort of, I suppose it hits the two parts of the coin. Like, the Russians wouldn't have been able to copy it, and we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of it if Ford himself didn't have the freedom and ability to profit
The
from
money,
what he was from his idea that he had in America, because if he wouldn't have had the incentive to invent these production lines that then were then copied by the Soviets,
basically,
and that will eventually fail because
when the car started
because
to
it's
come
all
out
in the
on
state and it
production
becomes
line.
inefficient and all that stuff. But without the spark of the freedom that Ford finds in the capitalist system in America, you wouldn't have had that for the Soviets to copy, because they wouldn't have invented that in a system that's so authoritarian and so collectivist and doesn't give that individual the ability to take a gamble, invent something and create it, I suppose.
Well, yeah, it was cheap as well. It was the mass market.
Well, yeah, yes. That's
that
the key, isn't it? So anything new, as soon as you can get it to mass market, then it will become cheaper.
And but yes, so from La Jette and Chris Marker, folks,
yes,
we've hit upon Fordism, the Russian Revolution. There's one other thing about the Russian Revolution as well. I don't know if this comes into what. Well, it does actually. That book I read, not the one that I'm reading at the moment, but the one Stalingrad.
Yeah.
It's massive. I think Putin's banned it again.
Oh, right. Well, that's a must-read then, isn't it?
It's 900 pages.
Well,
Stalin
if
banned
anyone's
it.
still locked down, that'll give them something to do.
It is one of the most brilliant. I mean, it's Russian.
Yeah.
It's vast. It's incredible. But you never. It's only right at the
sorry,
end.
just repeat, what was it? That's the Stalingrad.
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Who's that by then?
A guy called Grossman, a Russian, who was there at Stalingrad.
Right.
I forget his first name. It's Grossman. But that was banned. I mean, Stalin banned it.
Okay.
For all sorts of reasons. One was because Grossman focused his whole attention is on people. Not the machinery of people, but people.
Right.
The Russian people. You know, the soil of Russia, the landscape of Russia. And when you read it, you think, why the fuck? Sorry to swear, folks. Why the fuck did Hitler actually think he could beat this? What? How? And there's a great letter, which is not in the book, but it's quite an interesting letter in the first months of the war, when it appeared that the Wehrmacht and the Blitzkrieg would get into Moscow just like that. Everything there was blowing apart.
Well, they've been successful everywhere else up until that point.
Yeah, and this is interesting. What happened, there was this tank commander, and he wrote a letter home to his wife. And it's the first time you pick up an anxiety in this all-conquering, unstoppable army. Oh. They're going across the steppes for 3 days. I never seen a thing.
Wow.
The landscape hasn't changed. The sky hasn't changed. The flatness hasn't changed. And it was unnerving the troops. It was completely unnerving them. And they was getting seriously depressed.
Right.
I mean, not just, oh my God, seriously depressed. And, because they had no idea what they was up against.
Mm.
And there's another one that, about how the Russians turned the war into this great patriotic war. In the factories that were turning out all the weapons for the Russians, based, of course, on the Ford concept of industrial output. The workers, even with bullets, were allowed to put a mark on the bullets because it gave them the idea that they was part of the war.
Right.
When they were turning out aeroplanes, the workers could put their names on it.
Okay.
And it gave that whole sense of being part of saving Russia, not saving Stalin.
So to the geography,
and
appealing to the land and the people, and not
and
the
that
state
is
so much.
that is what's going on all the time in Stalingrad, the book.
Right.
And of course, the Blitzkrieg is about speed and all the different elements of warfare working together.
Sort of overwhelming force.
Yeah. What happens when the Blitzkrieg stops?
That seems like one of those really deep questions. Go on.
It stops. It can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I see.
It can't go backward. Well, it could have done, but there was no plan to go back. It was all go forward, go forward. Yeah. Now, so when it stopped outside the gates or the walls of Moscow, it was a big psychological. We've been stopped. Well, of course you've been stopped, you silly bastards, because you had no winter clothing. Even though the generals and all that were asking for winter clothing, Hitler had actually maintained you don't need it because you take it from the land They had no food, oil for the great Panzer divisions turned to ice. No one bothered to, look at the Russian winter.
I mean, this is the fascinating thing about that, to me. It's like Napoleon tried it like 130 years earlier and had exactly the same problem. Like, you can't get all the way into Russia and maintain your supply lines, and it's freezing cold, and all your men will die on the way home. Mainly of fatigue and starvation and...
Well, that comes to another problem.
I suppose I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but...
No, that comes to this whole problem about the military. The power of the military. Does the military of any country, does it ever learn from history? And the big one for that is the Second World War. Welcome to Chris Marker's La Jetee. Is the Second World War. The bombing. First of all, the Blitz over London did not work. For all sorts of reasons. One of the reasons was the people's spirit.
Yeah.
So we just won't give in. Right. Now, when the Allies began to bomb Germany, the same thing happened. The German population, particularly in Berlin, didn't give in. And in Berlin, it was virtually bomb flat. But the people didn't give in. Question why? And the question also, one of the reasons that Albert Speer, the Nazi architect, who was a big, built Hitler's megalomaniac buildings and what have you. Speer was saved from the death penalty at Nuremberg by the Americans. They'd done a deal.
Right.
Now, what they wanted to know is how did Germany survive that blizzard of bombs night after night, day after day? And he went through the whole thing that, it was the morale of the people that kept it going. Not just Hitler's speeches, but their homes were being bombed and they weren't going to move. Now, the Americans knew all this. They had all the information about it. Yet, when it comes to the Vietnam War, what did they use?
Attempted overwhelming force, napalm bombings.
Yeah, and it didn't work.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? I suppose, like...
But another thing, while I remember this... sorry, folks, we don't usually sort of go on to war. We talk usually about cultural things, but as we are, anyway.
But you can read in your books about Russian communism and art. It's just one of those themes at the moment, which is great.
Germany never had a war economy. What's the expression?
Go on.
Total war.
Yeah.
They didn't have total war.
Right.
We did. The British did straight away. After Dunkirk, it was total war.
Right.
The Russians had complete total war. It was only in about late 1943, that the Germans said total war. A bit late in the day. Part of that was because of this ideology of the family. Women should not fight in the war. They really...
Well, I suppose the whole...
And there's another great Russian book, again one of my favourites, The Unwomanly Face of War. And that book picked up the Nobel Peace Prize actually, some time back. Again, banned in Russia. And this was about Russian women snipers.
Okay.
And it is phenomenal.
And
it's also
again?
The Unwomanly Face of War. I'll give you details later.
Yeah, cool.
And it's phenomenal. And it's all this woman who's Alexievich. I'll give you the details later. She just records the voices of women who was in that war. And some of the stories as well about these young girls who demanded to go and fight. But actually, 16-year-old girls are going to fight.
Yeah.
They would leave school and they would march up with the troops. They would get sent back home. They would march up, it's quite unique. And it's very funny. And they kept on, these 15, 16-year-old young girls.
Yeah, I mean, there's archetypes of those in different stories from lots of
but
cultures.
not in
like
Nazi
you think
Germany.
of Mulan for a start in the Disney,
Nazi Germany,
it's the first one that comes
machine.
to mind. But there's always been those stories of the woman pretending to be a boy to go to war.
And in this country, it was part of the war program.
There was that
women in the factories.
The First World War. Dot. We had a one-woman show about her a couple of years ago here, and she basically hopped on her bicycle and cycled to the front lines.
Oh yeah. But this whole concept of where is this going, I don't know. Does it matter? Well, it sort of does. Yeah. It's about image. About Russia.
It was why,
banned,
wasn't it? It was why the not learning from history and why. So they bombed us, and we became prouder, stronger, more united to stand up to the bully, for want of a better word. And then the same thing happened in Berlin, and I guess that's it. Once you have an enemy that is trying to destroy your way of life, people become stronger. And so you say the Americans didn't learn from that in Vietnam, but it might be a constant. I suppose that's why wars last, or well, it's new, isn't it? It used to be you'd march off to somewhere, and you'd have a pitched battlefield, and all right. So the civilian consequences of occupation are they're ubiquitous, but in terms of once you've got aerial bombardment, it takes everything to a different level. I mean, you look at the sort of the Spanish partisans. As when Napoleon invaded Spain, the people rose up, and the reason he couldn't never really took Portugal. One, you've got the lines that Wellington built at Torres Vedras to protect Lisbon, but the fact that he had time to do that, and the fact that Napoleon found it so difficult, was because the people of the Spanish countryside would just shoot up his supply convoys and melt away. And I suppose I suppose in times of an outer threat and crisis, the people will find strength together to protect each other and defend what's theirs, I suppose. And so it's almost like you could learn that lesson, but there's if you're an invading force, there's no answer to that problem. And there's a different thing about the armies of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. They were mercenaries in all the armies as well. There were. I mean, we professionalised around the turn of the Waterloo was just overloaded with. I mean, there was Prussian on the side of the English.
What
happened
we were
all allied.
What happened
our army was at that time was the first real professional army.
But there was also in the First World War, there was no mercenaries. It was the Prussian concept of a modern army, and certainly, although you could say that there were mercenaries in the Nazi army, because the Ukrainian divisions at Stalingrad were annihilated. There were thousands and thousands of different. There were Turks fighting on the side of the Nazis at the D-Day landing,
Right.
Normandy.
Right.
But there was no mercenaries in the British army. Certainly no mercenaries in the Russian armies. Partisans, I don't know about that, but so it was a different type of warfare
Yeah.
that possibly made it even more ugly.
Yeah, I suppose it's professionalised to a certain extent, but it's hearth and home as opposed to money as a motivating factor within the lines, I suppose.
So we started with La Jette.
We did. And we've gone to war.
Yeah. Well, I mean, La Jette is about war.
But yes, so this is
about a nuclear.
Run back to La Jette. So this is in '61, and the future. Where are they? Where's the future that he's coming from? What is that date set, or is it just an amorphous the future?
Yeah, they were coming from the future,
but post the nuclear holocaust.
Yeah.
So that's what I suppose that was a very real fear, as you said, Cuba. So yeah, it's all linked.
Somewhere it's linked up, but there's a wonderful. Well, there's many wonderful little vignettes in Stalingrad where there's these two. There's a much older sort of general and these sort of younger lieutenant, and they're going through the maps. They're Russian. And I told you this story. They're going through these maps,
right.
And they're beginning to work out that the Germans are having these big victories, but they're not moving as fast as they were.
Right.
Because their losses were mounting. They were suffering quite a hell of a lot of deaths, the Germans. We don't really understand that. But what happened, while they're going through these maps, the general is speaking to this younger lieutenant, and they're talking about the difference between the Renaissance art movement and modernism. And as they're talking about this, they're beginning to work out where the gaps are appearing in the German front lines.
Oh, right.
And when you think about it, you think, yeah, art and culture on the battlefield.
Yeah.
It's what Tolstoy touches upon in War and Peace. Not as clear as that, but
right.
They're trying to work out these two officers where the gaps are appearing, but they're doing it with a discussion about the Renaissance period and modernity.
Sort of just allowing the mind to come at a problem from a different angle.
It's a wonderful piece of problem solving.
That's quite incredible.
But it's an incredible book. I mean, it really is.
Yes, 900 pages.
Yeah.
On Stalingrad.
Yeah. The build up to it, and the actual battle. You don't quite realise you're in the battle until parts of it. The sheer horror, particularly flamethrowers. That they were, you realise the utter squalor of the Weimar, what it had been reduced to. This great, all-conquering Sixth Army that had marched through Paris, jackboots and marching through the streets, and all-conquering, massive, great army, and they got surrounded, and they did not know. They were, we have still have this image that they may have been able to get out, but as a private soldier, wrote home and said, "It's at Stalingrad that the Weimar died."
Right.
And when you think of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers that were German soldiers that were lost, they could have made a get out, but Hitler refused. Stay and die. And the Russians only thought that there was about 70,000 troops in Stalingrad, German troops. They didn't realise it was 120,000. It was a whole army, with all the weapons, everything.
And they were just stopped by Russians.
Well, or by ideology.
Okay, go on.
There was no strategic reason to go to Stalingrad at all, except Stalin. Hitler got it into, he said, go to Stalingrad. It will break their psychology. He gave a speech.
Yeah, there was
one.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Two cults of personality.
Yeah. 99% of Stalingrad had been taken by the Germans. There was just one spot that refused to give up, and it was right on the Don. And it was important to get to that spot for the Germans, and they couldn't hack it. And by the time they couldn't hack it, the Russians had surrounded Stalingrad. The Germans didn't know they were surrounded. Hitler gave a speech praising that Stalingrad has fallen. No one knew the scale of the Russian army that was coming down their way.
Something like that happened to Caesar in Gaul. Can't remember the full story, but he ended up in somewhere, and then the reinforcements came.
Yeah.
And, he was Caesar. He managed to get out, but
there was offers to, one of the top Nazi generals, Mendelssohn, who eventually, after the war, became an advisor to NATO of how to confront the Russian army, because he was all about defence and not about blitzkrieg. And he and this other top-ranking general said to Hitler, we can get out of Stalingrad. It refused. No, you stay.
Right.
You're going to stay in Stalingrad because we're going to win it. And then, when it was too late, it was conceded that they could get a corridor to get out. It was just too late.
Wow. That sounds like an amazing book. It's like a story that we don't really know, like that side of it.
But there was one amazing part of the book, which is made up, and he virtually says this, Grossman, but it rings true. The massive parliamentary building in Berlin was never ever used. This vast, great architectural monster of a building. It was always empty, except for Hitler occasionally and some of his generals. All these maps and everything that you see him around was in one of his many places, like the Lion's Lair or whatever you call it. But in the book there's this frightening image of Hitler talking to himself. And it's quite scary actually, because it may be true.
Yeah.
On these vast great halls with these maps, not understanding what's going on, that the war is lost. And this was in 1933, before the Normandy. Most of the generals after Stalingrad knew it was over. They couldn't, they had one more chance at Kursk. But again, it wasn't total war for it was total war for the Russians.
that was it. Well, I suppose they had this idea of the fatherland idea. The fatherland idea, like the whole point of his kind of taking over Laban's realm. I suppose you have to have the Laban involved in your thinking. I suppose you have to have the living. So, like, if they're creating room to live in by pushing frontiers, then you need to separate the army from the people that you're doing that for as the aggressor. Like, I suppose that's why he didn't go to total war, because he was expanding, and he's expanding to create space for the German people to have a life in. But the defending, you have to have total war to push that kind of aggression back. And then, as you say, after Ukraine,
although the Nazis got a huge, great army, the people at first viewed the Nazis as liberators. They were putting statues down to Stalin. They was putting down, but
the 20th century was mad, wasn't it? We got the Nazis liberating people from the communists.
Yeah, but what happened was because the Nazi doctrine is that you don't need us to supply you, the army, with food. You've got all the food you want. Take it. And if people are stupid enough to try to stop you, take it, kill them. So within weeks.
That happens a lot, and it's often a downfall. Again, I mean, most of my knowledge is Napoleonic, but the same thing happened. So in Spain, Napoleon told his armies to take what they wanted. Wellington told his armies to pay for what they had off the peasantry and the people, and hanged men for stealing.
Yeah.
And then that's how he kept the Portuguese population and the Spanish population and the French, kept them on his side. And when they went into France, it's how he stopped the French population from really, fighting back on the side of the emperor. But it seems to be de rigueur in European history for an emperor, for one of whatever kind of title, Emperor, Führer, whatever, to disregard the enemy population in that way and try and force them into submission by stealing from them, as opposed to trying to get them onto his side.
And because they were told continuously. I'm still holding this. This is an amazing little book.
Well, that one. Travellers in the Third Reich by Julia Boyd. The rise of fascism through the eyes of everyday people. You see.
But these are the people who went to Nazi Germany to take holidays.
Oh, okay. So it's like a travel blog of people from other places watching it happen.
Well, first of all, not realising what's happening. Letters on it is an amazing book, actually. It's only now, it's been out for a couple of years, it's only now getting that recognition. It's also quite funny as well, but Hitler loved England, or the British Empire, really loved it. So English people, this is after the First World War, and with the rise of the Nazis, were treated amazingly well, absolutely brilliant. French, not really.
Propaganda aspect of that as well.
Well, basically, and again, this is something that we don't know about history. Usually when we think of the Nazi Party, we see Berlin and we see Nuremberg, major cities. Berlin was never a Nazi city. They didn't like the Nazis, but they put up with them. Where the Nazis were powerful, all powerful, was in places like Bavaria, the villages.
Right.
And what the Nazis did, they reinvented everything about village life in Germany. So people would go to these wonderfully preserved villages because, don't forget, Germany wasn't invaded in the First World War, unlike France and Belgium. So you had all these wonderful images, these beautiful villages where there was parties, there was lovely food, sunshine, and no violence, up to a point. But there's this great bit when it begins to turn where this secretary to an English ambassador, they leave Germany and he stops the car and he said, listen, this is when they crossed the border outside Germany, and he said in the letter, there was no noise because every single fucking day in Nazi Germany was noise, was bands and banners and marches and songs. Hitler Youth in every village. When a trainload of tourists came into a village, there was the boom, 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 Hitler Youth singing. You know, the whole station would be decorated in Germanic flowers and symbols. At night there would be marches and fire. It was just noise. This vast, great spectacle. And a lot of people loved it until what began to happen was like.
It's how totalitarian things take over, isn't it? It's seductive. You know, you sort of pleasure and circuses and joy, and you know, it's almost like bribing the soul of the ordinary person, or bribing the morality of the ordinary person with, you know, niceness.
Yeah.
And then that's fascinating. So that's travellers in the Third Reich, people going on holiday in Nazi Germany and writing about what
and
they
it was
saw.
only in after the Berlin Games that people began to realise that this is odd. You know.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? You know,
Where are the
seditious
Jews?
little
It's just
fluffy
so good,
ideas that hide a divisive and horrific underbelly, and like people, you know, most people, you'd just be quiet because these things happen slowly as well. Like,
and it
if it happens slowly enough that you don't notice, suddenly you can't do anything about it, and that's always
about
a danger.
history and memory. You know, the two, how they get played out, and sometimes with memory and history, there's always a collision. You know, that should make us think again about what we thought we knew, when in fact I still believe we don't know a lot about any war, about any conflict.
Well, no, there's too much to know, isn't there?
Did you ever see that clip that I sent you? Come and see.
Oh no, I didn't watch that one. I'm terrible.
Amongst all the other ones that I've sent you.
I know, I've got a huge list of clips.
I know.
Fortunately, they're only 5 minutes. I will just get around to them because, like, that's a serious log of really awesome movies that I just would never have gone near. Cause
you must watch those two. Last week I sent. Them.
Yeah.
And The Last Man on Earth, Vincent Price.
Okay.
Now, Them is real American popular culture,
right?
But with anxiety written large. It's about the nuclear bombs going off, in, you know, the experiments going on in the Nevada desert.
Right.
And it's absolutely. It came out as a B movie. one of those sort of drive-in movies.
Yeah.
But it's all there, all the paranoia about something is going on in the desert. It isn't the Red Terror. It's something to do with the nuclear bombs and big fucking monsters.
Oh, right. Yeah, I see.
Yeah. And The Last Man on Earth is based upon a book called I Am Legend, and it's Vincent Price. It's a black and white movie. It wasn't very successful when it came out. And it's about a virus.
Is that anything to do with the I Am Legend, the Will Smith movie that was it's the same story.
But he's kept it very close to the actual story.
Right.
And it's very relevant to today, the virus.
Oh, right.
There's a lot of references about what life was before this virus came along.
The before times.
Yeah.
I remember the before times. It's nice to be back open.
Which goes back to, of course, memory and Jetee.
Yeah. An image.
Yeah.
Hopefully the lovely people, if anyone bothers to listen to this ever, will have a lovely image of us sitting by a fireside in a tea house discussing all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah.
Really fascinating stuff. But yeah, image and memory and time. Yes.
And the real strangeness about Largette is the poetry is beautiful and the voice is beautiful. The narrator, very calm. So calm, in fact, that it becomes quite scary.
Right.
It's almost slightly sadistic in it. And you think, we know, well, when you first see it, you don't know, but it's like so matter of fact and perfect. It's all laid out for us. It's like a teacher explaining the image, and how this image is going to affect this guy's memory. And the guy, no one knows what has happened. Or no one knows the future, and the future is an atomic war. Think about it, my friend. Well, shall we end it there?
Yeah, no, that's lovely. And so I try and do them and the
Last Man on Earth.
Last Man on Earth.
Yeah.
We'll try and maybe start there next week then.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Alfie. That's lovely to. I do like chatting to you on a Sunday.
Oh, do you want that book?
Which one?
Harry's got a copy. The Great God Plan.
Oh yes, that's another one. I'm gonna have to make a really good list of the stuff we've talked about underneath this.
I've taken it off.
All right then. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you
next week.
Next week.
Goodbye.